Hi there, welcome to the second video looking at the 2 knight c3 variation. In the last video I looked at the move knight to e5 here, which is an interesting move, but I think objectively not the strongest or most challenging move for black. I think the most challenging move is the move g4, which I'm going to cover in probably this next video. In this video I'm going to mainly cover the move h3, which is an interesting option where white usually aims to sacrifice a pawn to get good compensation. And before I go into that line, I'm just going to mention quickly the knight d5, which is occasionally played, but it's not a particularly good move. Black still has this idea of knight into g4, and can take time out to defend against the knight takes c7 threats and opening up another attack on the knight. And so white still really has to deal with this knight g4 move, and so he probably has to play something like g4 when black can simply capture this knight on d5 and is doing very well. Play might continue knight d4, avoiding the capture on g4, and then f5, opening up the queen out to h4, and also undermining this pawn on g4. And black's already better there. So knight d5 is a bad move really for white. You should be happy to see that move. Instead, so we'll now look at h3. This move has an immediate trap. I recommend the move knight g4 immediately. If black plays c6, then it gives white an opportunity to transpose to a variation I looked at in the previous video, which is good for white after knight to e5 captures, and then I mentioned the move d4, which is a good move for white in that video. Also e3 is actually very strong. I didn't mention this last time, but it's possibly even better actually than d4, and white's pretty much winning this position already, just to all these threats bringing the queen out, possibly in combination with the knight, and there's just not really anything black can do about that. So knight g4, as I say, is the move I recommend you play to avoid those ideas. And then after h takes, now c6. Now white has a number of moves here. Probably the best move or the most common move is e4 or d4. Rook takes h7 is occasionally played, but it's not particularly dangerous for black. Now, in a video on YouTube already, I mentioned there was a series of videos on this variation that Onyebenze's done on YouTube, so I'm going to link to one of his videos. He recommends the move d5 here, which is a good move, but also I think it's possible to play queen a5. I quite like this because it's quite simple. Black's threatening just to come over to h5 and then down to h1, winning the game. To avoid that, white could maybe play e3. It seems a most natural move. But then queen f5, queen f3, e5. I think black's pretty much at least equal already. And he's got a little trap here that if bishop d3, aiming to like kick this queen, maybe create some kind of threats coming along with this diagonal. Black has the nice move bishop c5, attacking e3, and white's worse already. So rook takes h7 is not anything to be worried about. I'm going to look at d4 first. e4 I'm going to take as being my main move, and d4 can be played. Lines can transpose to each other. I recommend the move g6 against both options. h5 here is possible as it is against e4, but it's risky, and I think basically white's doing. I don't know if white's doing well or not, but he's certainly getting very interesting play with the idea of queen d3, threatening to come down to g6, and when black stops that, playing bishop to f4. This is quite a common idea that has been coming up in recent years in Atomic, this bishop f4 idea. So white's immediately threatening to come into c7, and if black stops it with d6, then knight d5 captures, queen b5, knight c6, bishop takes d6 is winning for white. So d6 isn't possible, and after e5, white has the idea of going queen to h3, attacking d7, and then after f5, bishop g5. And I think white's got good chances of getting a initiative here, but the position's still a little bit unclear. I'm not going to go into it too much, but I don't recommend you play that way. That's only one of white's options as well. He does have some other interesting ways to play against h5. I think g6 is a more solid option, just aiming to quickly develop the bishop over to h6, and we're not particularly worried about black recapturing the pawn on h7, because that basically gives up a tempo and allows black to get back in the game. So, or allows black to get an easy game, is perhaps a better way of putting it. Now e4 would transpose to lines we're going to look at later via e4 on move order, playing e4 first, but queen d3 is an interesting idea, and against this I recommend playing bishop to h6. Again, white could play bishop f4 with the same ideas. There's a trap that if d6 then black gets in trouble, but after e5, queen h3, f5, bishop g5, it leads to kind of unclear play. Black cannot capture this because of queen to h6, and this rook is covering the h4 square, so black really can't prevent this queen from invading and winning. But instead, queen to a5, so black now has the threat of e takes d4, and it leads to just an unclear game. If b4, then black comes in with queen to a3 with interesting play. So instead, white can try bishop takes h6, and I think in this case it makes sense for black to play h5, avoiding this capture on h7, because it's getting to be a bit dangerous now. White was threatening to play queen to e3, hitting at e7, and also threatening to come to h6. So black did have to do something about that, and h5 is one natural way of dealing with it. d5 is probably white's natural continuation, again threatening queen to e3 with an attack along the e file. But now after d6, opening up this bishop to come to defend on e6, queen to e3. Black can either play bishop e6 directly, which is an interesting way to play, or playing e5 captures bishop to e6, and then after knight d5, which is probably white's idea, playing king f8, which now gives black some options of this bishop moving, and if the knight moves from d5, then bishop c4 is an idea. It's just an unclear position. I'm not quite sure who's coming off better there, but it's just leading to kind of messy play. So queen d3 is an interesting way for white to play. I think it just leads to positions with chances for both sides. More likely is the move you're going to meet is e4. This is certainly more natural, opening up the bishop and opening up the queen, aiming for some more kind of immediate tactics. Knight d5 is an immediate threat, and again h5 I think is a risky move. I have played this on occasion, but it generally leads to positions where white just quickly develops, say with d4, or perhaps sacrificing a knight on d5 first, and it just increases white's initiative. Well, if we play g6, the truth is that white's not really threatening to take on h7 anyway, because if he does take on h7 here, he can quickly get into trouble after bishop h6 followed by d5, and this bishop's now coming over to g4, and if however white stops that, say g4, knight to a6, forcing bishop takes a6, and then e5. Black's really undermining these pawns over here on the king side and has very good play. Similarly, bishop to e2 can be met by knight to a6 as well, with very good chances for black. So rook takes h7 is not a very good idea. Even giving up the tempo anyway, you generally assume black's going to get a very good or reasonable position there. A common move is actually rook to h6, and this again was covered quite well by Onyebenze in his video, with the move d6. I'm not going to go into this too much detail here, but the general idea is that after either knight d5 or d4 first, let's say knight d5 followed by d4, or bishop b5 and then d4, black simply captures this exchange back and then develops the bishop to g4 and plays e6. And there are options that if this bishop gets taken, then f5, opening up this queen, and if this bishop moves, then the rook can come to f8, either directly or by castling, and black's getting good counterplay. So if you want more details on that line, then I'd recommend looking at that video. But basically black is doing fine there as well. More testing on, certainly what I see more often, is either d4 or knight d5. d4 first is probably more flexible, because white can transpose back and forth by playing knight d5 on a later move. and here I recommend bishop to h6. And so white has two options again. He can play bishop f4, but in this case I don't think it's particularly good because d6 is actually possible here, and if knight d5 captures, bishop b5, knight c6, bishop takes, king f8, black's actually doing very well because this bishop is threatening to come into white's position, and if f4, then bishop g4, queen d2, queen a5, and white's actually in some trouble. So I don't think that bishop f4 is really kind of posing black any problems, so white should probably play bishop takes h6. It can often be used, this weak square on h6 can often be used for white for various queen tactics. For example, maybe bringing the queen out to g4 followed by f4 might be one idea. And black has to kind of deal with that and play h5. It's also true that if black tries to play a sensible move like d6, rook takes h7 can actually land black in some troubles because he's pretty much undeveloped and white's quicker with his pieces, and if he can get maybe this rook over to the h1, then black's going to be in trouble, and it's best to avoid that. So h5, and now, so if white could have played knight d5 on a previous move, so I'll look at that here, it would generally have transposed if he'd done it previously, and then bishop b5, knight c6, and the two natural moves for white are to push both the centre pawns. So d5 is one option, but this does weaken this diagonal, and white has given away his dark squared bishop. So often this can actually get white into a bit of difficulties. One option is here to play. In fact, I think black has a very good option here to play queen to a5 check, c3, and then king to f8. This king f8 idea is a very common theme in this line, and knight d4 now is an immediate threat, and if this is captured, then again preying along this diagonal with queen c5 winning material is well, and remember that black does have this extra bishop already, so it's pretty much a disaster for white if he has to swap off queens and give away a pawn. So instead of d5, I think e5 is probably better, but still I think black's doing fairly well with the move again, king to f8, opening up ideas of perhaps jumping with this knight to b4 in the future. And if queen f3, then f5 is a good idea, just avoiding this capture on f6, and you can sometimes cramp further down on that queen with the move to f4, and black's doing reasonably well. So I don't think the knight d5 sacrifice is too worrying, but if white tries to kind of forego that and maybe push in the centre anyway, with either d5 or e5, again I think black gets good play. If d5 immediately, then black can play knight to a6 is one option. Now that white, in the previous line with knight d5, this wasn't possible because this bishop could come to b5, but here this pawn on c6 defends that idea from white, so that's one option. And another option for black is to play the sensible move, just d6, and responding to e5 with playing knight a6 now, after this is captured, simply just developing and opening up the f file, and black's going to get good counterplay along this line. So I think black's doing quite well there, and if e5 first, I recommend the move d5, just trying to grab some space in the centre. The natural continuation for white would be e6, really aiming to cramp down on this bishop, but I don't think it's too much of a problem for black. You can develop with knight to a6, and after bishop takes a6, play b5, and there are various options here for black of how to continue. One option, so this queen might come to c7, aim to kind of come over this way, and also pushing on the queen side with c5. Another idea is even to push this pawn up to a4 and then b4, and develop the bishop over this way to a6. That could be like a long-term plan, or a medium-term plan perhaps, for black to implement and get rid of that bishop, which is looking a little bit short of squares. And I think generally, remember that black does have this extra pawn on h5, and as long as white's already swapped off quite a few pieces now, and black's kind of looking to consolidate that extra material and is doing quite well. So I think that's it really for h3, and I think if you follow these lines, you should be able to look forward to the middle game with some confidence. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye for now.